From Hasselblad, the company that put a camera on the moon. It's mirrorless, medium format, and 50 megapixels, but it's still hand-holdable and fully automatic. The X1D 50C is not right for everyone, or even most people, but is it right for you? The Hasselblad X1D is a luxury. It's like Ferrari or Rolex, and that means most of us can't afford it. And it also means that you can't justify it. But you don't justify a Ferrari by determining that it's the most efficient way to get your kids to soccer. It's not. It's a Ferrari. You get it because you love it, because you have some passion for the brand, and because you know the history. So if you don't know the history of Hasselblad, go learn it now, because it won't make any sense to you why people would spend $17,000 on this camera set. But if you do know that history of Hasselblad, you probably love it. You probably want it, even though it doesn't make sense, because it grabs at your heart. The way this camera feels is spectacular. There's no other camera like it. It feels better than anything. Look at this mode dial. It's recessed, it pops up brilliantly. The action on it is fantastic. The user interface on this camera is better than any I've ever used. Look, I can swipe. What other camera can do that? They learned from smartphones, and it works. Look at that. This is a camera with GPS. I know, every camera should have GPS, but look at the way they implemented it. It's in this little removable device that fits into the hot shoe, and it works. And all the pictures I've taken are locked in. What I love most about this Hasselblad is it's a Hasselblad I can take with me. It's a Hasselblad I can use every day. And sure, there are times when I take pictures with it and I could have just used my smartphone and nobody would have known the difference. You don't have to get medium format quality every time you use it, because you're using it because you love it. So my kid had a charity event and I brought it and I took pictures and I got to bring a Hasselblad to her fair. So the Hasselblad X1D is a real Hasselblad, and it's wonderful. But it has some serious flaws. If you're a person who's interested in the most bang for the buck, you would hate the Hasselblad. If you want to shoot sports, the Hasselblad is not for you. It doesn't even have continuous focus, and the buffer fills up pretty quick. The metering on it is pretty primitive. It'll often just miss exposure when other cameras would have gotten it. The focusing can be inaccurate. It does shoot video, but it's only 1080p. The battery mechanism is brilliant. I love the way you do a little double tap to pull it out, but the battery life itself sucks and is frustrating, and you have to travel with extra batteries, which you shouldn't have to do in a $7,000 camera. The power button here is terrible. I wish it were just a regular mechanical button, so I often end up forgetting that it's on. If you're a person who wants stabilized lenses or a stabilized sensor, it's not gonna work for you. There's no stabilized lenses and no stabilized sensor. If you like zooms, can't do it. There are 4 prime lenses in total right now. You have to use those lenses, and that's it. I've been doing that, and it changed the way I shoot a little bit. It meant that whatever lens I put on there, I shot the best shot I could get with that lens. Sometimes I had to move, sometimes I had to think a little differently, but I still had fun with it. There are no stabilized lenses, there are no zooms, but the lenses are special because they have leaf shutters. The shutter is built into each individual lens, and that means that you can sync your flash at any speed. And you can use Nikon flashes with this Hasselblad, so you have plenty of options available. The sensor is big, but the crop factor maybe isn't what you'd expect. It's 0.79. And that means that these f3.5 lenses end up being equivalent to an f2.8 35mm prime. That leaf shutter that I talked about prevents them from being much faster. So when you think about medium format, you think about all that beautiful bokeh that you can get. You're actually going to get much more background blur out of standard 35mm cameras. Or you could pick up the Fuji, which uses a conventional shutter and thus can have faster lenses. So that leaf shutter, it's cool, it's part of the Hasselblad tradition, but it holds you back a little bit. Let's talk more about the sensor size. It's medium format, and a lot of you lust over medium format, but why? The sensor is only about 30% bigger than a full frame sensor. Keep in mind, if you go from APS-C to full frame, you go to about 2.3 times, 230% bigger. So 30% bigger isn't that much of a difference. But if you're printing in 8x10 format, then this sensor is 90% bigger because the aspect ratio is different. In other words, with a 35mm camera, you have to crop so much off the sides for 8x10 that this is actually close to twice as big. And that can mean you get a lot more of those 50 megapixels. So how much better is it really than a full frame camera? There's only one way to find out. I brought an A7R III from Sony because it's mirrorless and 42 megapixels and it seems like the closest analog. I needed something in the foreground so I could really test the sharpness because it's a hazy day and all the sharpness would be killed by the atmosphere. Sure wish it had a tilty screen like the Sony or the Fuji medium format camera so I didn't have to sit on the ground like this. We found all the Hasselblad lenses to be very sharp. The dynamic range and color depth are excellent, but not better than the full-frame competition. High ISO images might look a little better, but faster lenses and stabilization available for 35mm cameras will produce better low-light results. Right away when I switched to the Sony, I noticed, oh my god, this thing is so fast. Everything about the Hasselblad is just so slow and deliberate. And you can take that as a criticism, but you have to get the Hasselblad and just go with that. That has to be your new style, and that's not bad. So maybe the Sony is a better value, but I still love the Hasselblad for the process of photography because I love the method of taking pictures. The real test for this is going to be Chelsea. So let's give it to Chelsea and see how she does with a real portrait shoot.
Wait, how do you change the focusing point?
Drag your thumb along the touchscreen.
Oh, that's cool. Okay. I'm gonna go full manual. In this backlit photo shoot, the Hasselblad back focused on the far eye for most of my photos. I shot it side by side with the Nikon D850 and the 105-1.4 and did not experience the same back focusing with the Nikon. The EVF doesn't look very good. She looks green. I do love the touchscreen. I love that I can just zoom in, very intuitive, and you can just swipe and change any of your settings, which I like a lot. So I'm gonna up my shutter speed, and that's simple and intuitive, and I love that. And I think that you'd get used to the EVF too, but it doesn't look great. The pictures look good. And when you shoot vertical, suddenly changing the focusing points is a little more awkward if you're dragging your thumb. But I'd say that this camera is a different experience in a good way. It's fun to use. Okay, so Emily and I, we're gonna go to Harkness. We're gonna get some portrait photos with the Hasselblad, and I don't know, I think it's gonna be a fun experience. The Hasselblad's autofocus was much more accurate in bright outdoor lighting, nailing focus about 1/4 of the time for still shots. So one thing I'm noticing is that if I don't shoot for a few seconds, the screen goes black, and it just takes a beat for it to wake up. It's a little frustrating, a little bit laggy. I wish it were more instantaneous. That looks great. The detail is incredible, as good as any camera I've ever used. Straight out the camera, the colors from the Hasselblad are a bit flat, but color is very easy to adjust to your taste in post. Ooh, that looks so much better.
Because of all the background blur.
Yeah. Shooting with the Hasselblad and the Nikon D850 with the 105-1.4 are two very different experiences. All right, now I'm in business here. The Nikon provided far more background blur, and it did it more efficiently and for about half the price. The Nikon's lower base ISO cancels out the noise and dynamic range benefits for the Hasselblad's medium format sensor. For my usual style of shooting a fast-paced photo shoot, this slows you down a little bit. There's a little bit of lag. You have to take your time a little bit more. It reminds me of a film camera. It's fun to use and the controls are fun, but it definitely slows you down and makes you take a more thoughtful photo. This camera is more about the journey than the destination. In a slower environment like our walk through Ender's Island, I enjoyed taking my time composing shots, and I also enjoyed the Hasselblad's film-like feel. For the faster-paced portrait shoot, I prefer to shoot with a camera that's a bit more responsive. If you want to see more reviews and tutorials like these, subscribe down below, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below on some other videos you might like to see.
If you want to know more about using the Hasselblad or almost any camera, check our tutorials at this link.